Welcome to the second part of a talk by Jack Halberstam. This is on the importance and the future of gender studies. I'm really happy to have Jack here. Let's get started.
All right. Thank you, Red. I'm Jack Halberstam. I teach at Columbia University, where I'm also running the Institute for Gender and Sexuality. I've been working in gender studies for a long time, and I really do believe in the mission of gender studies, and I've seen a lot of things change. Been teaching gender studies classes since about the mid-90s. The students have really changed, the topics have really changed, but they haven't just like progressed in a steady uphill climb so that we are now finally, you know, a deeply gender egalitarian society. Not at all. There have been ups, there have been downs, and we are on a very low down at the moment. So I want to make a pitch today for the importance of gender and sexuality studies, not simply to people who already consider themselves to be feminists and are already signed up for the program, but to everybody else in a way. And to say that any university that lacks a gender and sexuality studies program is doing a disservice to its students, its faculty, and its staff. And as I said in the last hour, sexuality and gender studies is not separate from the study of all of the other classifications that divide us and put us in association. And no gender studies, gender and sexuality studies program is only about the gendered body or about sexual practices. It is always also about race, class, status, nation, the world, okay? And I want to just say a few things that will make that very clear. First off, however, given the media headlines of the last, year, right, with Me Too and Time's Up and Harvey Weinstein's this and that, and if I hear one more story about a guy coming out of the shower in a towel, I'm just going to be like, please, no more, okay? We've heard all these stories, and for many people, for mostly women type people, this is like, this is not new, I know this, but for many people, it's amazing to hear how pervasive the experience of sexual assault is for young women coming up in this country. That to get through adolescence without having in some way been victim to or subject to some form of predatory sexual behavior or harassment seems like it is the experience of, I think they have it as high as like 8 out of 10 women. How that then is not a problem for everyone, I don't know, okay? So if gender studies programs needed a rationale for why now they would require more funding, more support, we have it. We have it in the form of a public conversation that is ongoing and to which that has identified a problem to which we seem not to know what the solution might be, right? So we've had endless narratives in the press, Kevin Spacey this, Harvey Weinstein that, Bill Cosby the other, and yet the only solution we can come up with for what to do about this seems to be more police, right? Let's get the law on this. The law has turned a blind eye to the sexual harassment of women, the rape of women, particularly the rape of women of color, and particularly domestic rape, forever. So why are we going to the law? We need to change the culture. And the way that you change the culture are through these kinds of programs that are under attack now. And it is no accident that they're under attack now. How can it be possible that we're having a national conversation about sexual harassment at the very moment that people are like, do we really need gender studies? Those two things must be related. And for those reasons, I believe that we all have to stand up for these programs, maybe rethink them, maybe change the way in which they work. But we do need to support each other to hold on to these programs and think about what their future might be. So that's one thing that I wanted to say. In terms of the university has its own way of supporting the status quo. So I do not want to at all say, if we just take the right classes, we can resolve this. That is not the point. The university itself can be part of fixing in place a status quo that cannot be moved. And the way that works in the university is by using these disciplinary formations and acting as if that is the only way to disseminate knowledge. So it's like English, history, biology, these seemingly neutral disciplines where you just learn what that field has to offer you and then off you go. In that climate, gender studies, ethnic studies, these look like specialized interests versus the universal knowledge that is being circulated through the other disciplines. So I want to offer a critique of disciplinarity and say that everything that you study is interested, has an interest, has a political valence to it. The difference between those areas of study and gender studies is that we are upfront about having a political project, okay? Ethnic studies and gender studies is up front. We do have a political project. We do want to change the world, right? People in history aren't saying that to each other. They're saying this is a great project, on plantations in 18th century America, even though it doesn't focus on slavery. It's a great project, right? People are interested in different values when it comes to the normal disciplines than we are when it comes to the interdisciplines. So my first point is that we need interdisciplinary projects now more than ever. And the disciplines themselves are part of the problem. They are not the solution, precisely because they make it seem as if there is just a way of knowing, something to know, and we can deliver that knowledge to you. That's not what knowing and learning is. Knowing and learning is not a delivery system. Knowing and learning is about being open to hearing different points of view, different perspectives, and hearing things that challenge your entire way of being, okay? And that is the kind of classes that we hope to offer in women, gender, sexuality studies, black studies, ethnic studies programs. So in these kinds of programs as well, we are deeply committed to building bridges to off-campus. We don't think that we just have to live in a little ivory tower in an isolated bubble and tell each other great things about a book that 3 people have read, right? In gender studies, in ethnic studies, we recognize that the university has sealed itself off, often from communities that it should be serving and be in communication with. Before I was at Columbia, I was at USC, and USC is in quite a poor, mostly people of color neighborhood in LA. And in the early 90s, when the LA rebellion happened in the wake of the Rodney King beatings, that neighborhood went into full-scale rebellion. And what USC did was it closed its gates. It closed its gates and it set up security to make sure that the anger of that community did not affect USC, and those security measures stayed in place. That sends absolutely the wrong message about what a university should be. In gender studies, in ethnic studies, we don't want to close the gates. We want to figure out how to maybe take the kinds of tuition that you get from students who are taking classes and use it to maybe offer other classes pro bono in a community, right? Why can't we do that? Why couldn't we also offer an evening class where you get for free the things that other people are paying for in order to get their degree? Not everyone needs a degree. Some people just want to learn. So in our programs, we're often partnering, for example, with prisons or partnering with different kinds of organizations that will make that bridge really easy. I'll just make 3 or 4 more points, okay? So disciplinarity, the necessity of these programs now, gender studies as a good way of confronting this pervasive atmosphere of gender polarity, gender hierarchies, and sexual abuse. But second, the second thing that you get out of the kinds of programs that I'm interested in and that I believe we should be supporting are theories of power. Now, you don't go to history and English for theory of power, but you do go to black studies, ethnic studies, and gender studies for theory of power. If you don't know how power works, how on earth are you going to know how to oppose the forces that are there to sort of destroy you or hold you in place? So in gender studies, and particularly in the study of sexuality, we have thought long and hard about power. And there's a philosopher from France called Michel Foucault, some people here may have read He wrote one of the most important, very, very short books ever written. In 109 pages, he explains how power works through the production of sexuality as an identity. That seems impossible, and it is a complicated book, but it's a book I teach every year in my Intro to Sexuality class, and he reminds us that power works as a network. It doesn't work from the top down. It works as a network, which has two different effects, one bad, one good. One effect is that power is very diffuse, so it's very hard to figure out who's actually responsible for anything, right? Think about the last time you called about your power bill. That's not my fault. Well, I didn't do this, right? Why are you yelling at me? You know, that your power bill where you've hardly turned a light on is $300. That's not my fault. Okay, it's nobody's fault because power is dispersed, right? But the good part of this is that everyone has power in a society that isn't governed by a king, top down. So we have power, and we have to figure out what forms of power are available to us depending on who we are, where we're situated, and how to use that power to make change. You can learn that stuff in college in the right programs. You will not learn that through the kind of neutral transfers of knowledge that I'm talking about. Like in a business school. And I'm not saying don't go to business school, but a business school, just as an example, you should be reading Marx in a business school, honestly. You should, because you should understand how it is that capital circulates. You should understand where value comes from and what the relationship is between use and other forms of value. And you should know how a commodity is created. Why does the latest Nike shoe that costs 12 cents to make, why does it cost you $120 to buy? You know who will explain that to you? Marx will, and almost no one else, because it behooves capitalism and its systems and its mechanisms to mask the system from the people who basically are the cannon fodder for its appropriation of wealth and resources. But in an MBA, you're not reading Marx. You are just reading about capitalism as if capitalism is inevitable. It is not inevitable. Until very recently, there has always been multiple forms of economy that opposed capitalism and were separate from capital. But with the end of the Cold War and the complete decimation of any sense of socialism as a potential alternative, we have done without an alternative to capital. And without an alternative to capital, capital has run wild. And so we're now in this state where we actually don't see how we could get outside of a system that has been revealed to us as productive of the inequities that we are struggling to fight. Therefore, it cannot be the solution, because it is the form. It is the form of our problem. It cannot be its solution. You can't cure capitalist-induced inequality through more capital. It shouldn't just be empowering communities to empower themselves. That's not what happens, right? Good example, the real estate market. Real estate was sold to people in the post-war period as a kind of reward. You fought in the war, you did your duty to the country, you deserve a home, and we're going to make mortgages available. You can buy a house. Everyone should be able to buy a house. Look what happened to real estate. You got luxury buildings going up in downtown Manhattan that no one's going to live in. No one is living in that $43 million penthouse because it's not about living in it. That property went up because somebody had too much money in one place and needed to move it around. Because the funny thing about capital, it isn't only threatened by debt, it's also threatened by surplus, right? You need to move money to make money. So now the real estate market, which is where regular people who were not playing the stock market could put some money and hope by the time that they were ready to retire that investment would mature, that was when brokers were like, I wonder if we can fix this system, because all these people are putting money into it. How can we turn it into a pyramid scheme? It's no accident we have a real estate president, okay? It's no accident. Real estate is not about possession, it's about dispossession. But you can't know that from just being given a bland history of this or that. You cannot know it from getting an MBA. You can only know it through these interdisciplinary units that are committed 100% to exposing the corruption that lies at the heart of the nation state on the one hand, what we call democracy, which is really, vote suppression at this point, and real estate. All these things that are offered to you as part of what comes with democracy are in fact vectors for dispossession. That's complicated, and we won't know how to oppose that without the kind of deep study that our programs give us, without reading, going back and reading W.E.B. Du Bois, for example, coming into the middle of the century, reading people like Angela Davis, Gayatri Spivak, Lisa Lowe. These are authors that we teach in these programs precisely because they have a political take on the problems that we face today. They don't act as if those problems were inevitable, plague any culture, and are simply things that we should live with. And if we continue in this vein, the track we're on right now is to deliver most of the world's wealth to a tiny, tiny group of white people. That is the path that we're on. And the question of how to stop that from happening, I mean, we may have missed the boat, I'm not sure. But if you just think of something like environmental change, we knew in the 60s that we were on the path to ruination in terms of climate change. Right. There's no new information. We knew in the 60s. And there were all kinds of programs that people put in place in universities to get scientists working on what we could do about climate change. Those programs are also suppressed. We're in the university, here we are fiddling on silly projects when there are big projects that if we reorganized our disciplines according to some of the insights that have been produced in interdisciplinary work, we could attack some of these problems. But the university right now is so outside of public life that its impact is really small, and we need to change that, okay? When was the last time you even saw an academic on a talk show or on the news, an academic who studied the very thing that they're talking about? When was the last, why aren't economists all over telling us why this particular economy is set up for the next bust? Why aren't we hearing that? Why were people surprised by the last economic collapse? Answer, they weren't. They engineered it because it was going to take money from us and give it to them. And that's why this boom-bust economy is tolerated. It's very good for very few people, and it's very bad for everyone else. Okay, I'll make 2 more points. And this is a point I began talking about in the last session, and that is that gender studies is no good to anyone if it only speaks to LGBT people and white women. It really isn't. And I am fighting at Columbia to change gender studies because I'm also not supporting that program. I'm not. And I'm a queer person who my whole life has wanted to see LGBT programs in universities. But I don't want to see a program that is separated out from the study of everything else as if this is a separate issue. So, for example, I have white trans students who come to me and say, but trans people are so vulnerable. We're the victims of violence, 19 times more likely to be a victim of violence than a cisgendered person. Well, are you? Or is it the woman of color sex worker who is the trans person who is 19, let's say 50 times more likely to be the victim of violence? A white trans man? Yes, this is a difficult path, but it isn't where that statistic comes from. Okay, and I feel like that's an important difference to make. So, for years people are like, well, LGBT people are economically less viable than straight people. That's actually not true. You know who's poor in this country? Women with kids, single women with kids, heterosexual women with kids. LGBT, doing okay. Often it's 2 adults in a household with no kids, okay? So we have our hierarchies wrong here, and if gender studies is only involved in saying LGBT people at the bottom of this pyramid, we're lost. That is not a good way of thinking about the impact of gender studies. So within that same dynamic, we must also talk to young men. We really must, because almost no one talks to young men as young men, right? They're just like guys in an engineering program, guys in a math program, guys in the programs that guys take, right? What if you talk to young men, with young men, about masculinity? I'll tell you what, It is not easy to be a young man on a college campus right now, because it's very unclear what we even mean by sex at this point. I don't think we necessarily always know. And a young man who's just left his parents' home, come onto a college campus, he's ready to date some women, and suddenly the rules have changed, which is good, very good. Let's make sure that the rules change and women feel protected and women are advocates for consent and all that. But guess what? You have to tell the guys too. We can't just be women sitting around telling each other, let's not put up with sexual abuse, let's not be victims of sexual harassment. You know, and I say this to my class in a humorous way, men are people too, right? Let's have a conversation. So I had a conversation at Columbia 3 weeks ago with a group of young men mostly from sports teams who were interested in having that conversation about masculinity. And they were so sweet, so interested in thinking further about masculinity, no idea where they would go to have a conversation about masculinity. And I was like, you know, gender studies is sort of one of those places where we can look at, for example, the way in which black and white masculinities have been produced in really, really different ways, and in ways that contribute, in fact, to white supremacy. So when we say masculinity, masculine empowerment, we're really talking about white men, right? We're not talking about black masculinity in the same way. Also, work has changed so much that what we even mean by work has changed radically in the last, let's say, 2 decades, from being something that men did manually to something that men do in offices, right? So according to that, then masculinity must mean something really different now than it did, let's say, a decade ago, 2 decades ago. So I believe that gender studies has an obligation to reach out to young heterosexual men rather than just tell everyone else about young heterosexual men and warn people about them. We should be educating each other about how masculinity is produced, how it circulates, how it is supported, what it should be its future, and so on. All right, final point then. This final point, back to the beginning, this is not the time to winnow down the study of sex, race, gender, and class. It isn't. We should put all of our resources into these programs, because that is the only chance we have of actually changing things in terms of this crazy, depressing political climate. I'm not going to say that we find ourselves in, that we have been put into, okay? This is, you know, one of the oldest gender studies programs in the system, in the CUNY system, as I understand it. And again, as I understand it, no one's trying to shut it down. But there is a question about whether it's going to be downsized, whether there's going to be a retraction of resources. And I think that this is something really, really worth your while to fight for. The study of sex and gender is more relevant now than it ever was. And I'm not saying that all the answers will come through the study of gender and sexuality, but I am saying that these programs stand for something much bigger than what that title implies. And so if that goes, a lot of other things are going to go with it. So I hope that we can have, you know, a conversation about what's happening here, which is not at all something that I feel particularly, that I know a lot about, and I'm really excited to hear from everyone else and learn something about what's happening here and what we can do to support people here to continue their work. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Dr. Halberstam. So I was thinking maybe we could just do like a quick introduction, just names around the table for the faculty here, just because I'm really appreciative and grateful that folks are here. And not just women and gender studies faculty, people doing ethnic studies, LGBT studies, critical race studies, any kind of diversity, multiculturalism work or interdisciplinary work, or even if you're just a supporter of it and you're not doing that work. So I'm really glad that folks are here. So we could just maybe do quick intros.
Jason Leggett. I teach in political science, history, philosophy, and criminal justice, but my background is in transdisciplinary studies, specifically law and society and a variety of issues related.
I'm Katia Perea. I teach sociology here. I'm a cultural sociologist, and I do media and gender studies.
Jen Oliveri. I teach in the English department, and I'm a co-director of Safe Zone.
My name is Dominic Wetzel. I teach in sociology, and my sociology of gender classes here. And I do work in religion, sexuality, and politics, among other things.
I'm Joanna Stein. I teach in the English department, and I also teach creative writing, and I do work with women in gender studies as well.
I'm Red Washburn. I'm in English, and I direct women in gender studies.
Hi, I'm Amy Karp. I'm in English, and I also do women's and gender studies, and I focus on ethnic assimilation and LGBT studies.
I'm Stu Parker. I teach in sociology. I taught an all-male linked class, and we're going to teach an all-female linked class in the coming semester.
I'm Petra Simister. I'm in behavioral sciences. I teach social psychology and intro psychology. My background is in social psychology.
Homer Bersena, physical sciences and honors program.
I'm Marilyn Navarro. I teach in the English department, and one of my courses is English 24. It's a research with a social sciences theme, and gender is part of the of my curriculum.
Hi, I'm Allison Better. I teach in sociology. My areas of specialization are sexualities, bodies, and gender. I also teach sociology of gender here.
Hi, I'm Cindy Greenberg. I'm the director of speech communications, and I do work in language and communication. And I'm also a director of liberal arts, and liberal arts is where women and gender studies concentration currently lives.
Hi, I'm Kavisha Eccles. I teach in a community health program. I also teach human sexuality, and my specialty is sex worker advocacy.
Just wondering, does anyone, faculty, or even students, have a question for Dr. Halberstam in terms of the importance or the future of gender studies on this campus? This is time for you all to contribute to this dialogue. Anyone, faculty, want to jump in?
I was just going to say, I'm loud. I don't do that. Okay. I was just going to say, oh, for the camera, I need that. All right. For posterity. No, I just wanted to say, as someone who hasn't taught these classes yet, what can we do to infuse this sort of information into our subjects so that, you know, maybe it would be harder to get rid of this stuff if all of us are just kind of teaching it as part of our subject matter.
May I? I think that, oh yes, for posterity, sorry. I think because of who we are as scholars and what we do in our classroom, we do in many ways bring this in all the time, particularly with whatever it is we're doing, be it references to gender, references to sexuality, references to race, references to class. These are intersectionalities of identities that we've been referencing for a long time that we know are not separate from each other. And so we do it just basically because of the people that we are. And it's been coming down to, in my research, I write about television cartoons, and I've been trying to think about these are the good ones and these are the ones that suck. And for so many years, I've been trying to realize, why are these the good ones? And it's not because there's an intention of, I'm going to try to put this playful transgression that's counter-hegemonic into the cartoon. It's actually because it's being made by cool people. So what we're sort of looking at is the necessitation of when it is that we bring faculty into the university system, that we're getting people for, I'm sorry, lack of a better word, but that are woke, you know? And I'm so happy to be so proud and looking at everyone here that we are Kingsborough. We're a bunch of fucking really cool people here. And so what yes, we are. And what we're dealing with is these archaic ideas of formulation, and the critique of the Ivy Tower, that's long ago. We are not ivory. And so this idea of like, and in a way, when I come forward, it's exhausting to be attacked from the right and then attacked from the left as being critiqued of like, oh, academics are like this. I was like, I'm right there with you, brother. I point at them too. But you know, I believe in the idea of higher education as the way that through this noble way of discussing with each other our ideas in an environment that is created for that, we bring forward these things regardless of the subject, which is what you were saying, like in this business class. I've noticed with my college students, they constantly say, why is this the first time that I hear about this stuff? It's been completely removed from their high school education. It's been completely removed from middle school education. We've been knowing this for a long time. 15 years ago, we started talking about the corporatizing of the university structure. We are feeling these very real repercussions because we have turned into a profit business. Education should never be for profit. It's the whole idea of like what this is for. So I think that you do bring it into your class just basically because of who it is that you are. You have some super cool ideas in your head and you integrate it into what you sort of do. So it's not so much that here's a sort of little, you could get, here's a little guideline to sort of introduce these things, and sure, but because you're who it is that you are with the dignity that you carry on a daily life, you're presenting it nonstop.
Someone else want to jump in? Any faculty?
Okay. So I think there's two issues, though. One is how do we center what I think Dr. Halberstam talked about as very important in terms of the theories of power. How do we center that and race and gender and all of that in our courses, as opposed to making references throughout a basically traditional class? And then I think the other question is, what do we do with our colleagues? Because, you know, Red's done a very good job of creating this space here. This is not, as much as I would like it to be, Kingsborough. You know, when I go to a department meeting, you know, this is not what we see, right? And that's, we have a pretty good department. But, so I think his question is, how do we, maybe you could talk a little more about the, which I'm totally for blowing up the disciplines, and taking out textbooks and Scantron machines along with them. But I was wondering, maybe you could talk a little more about how, like a place like Columbia, which, you know, we are aspiring Columbians, you know, in terms of culture. You know, everybody wants to be like Columbia here. So you have that nice exalted spot. What do you see as some of the wedge points or leverage points in terms of that effort?
Well, first, I just want to, you know, thank Katya, thank you. Katya, for reminding us that, you know, a community college doesn't need to strive to, you know, open up the university to the community. It is already, it's not building bridges, it is a community, and it's got a completely different kind of ethos around education, outreach, and all of that stuff. And that speaks then very much to this question of, well, what about a place like Columbia? I mean, I was not Ivy League trained. I went to only public universities, and I taught most of my career in public universities. And I was surprised as anyone when this place hired me, and I'm just like, okay, let's do this, you know. And my goal there, I think you can only change things from the bottom up. So you want to get different kinds of students in the classroom, and then you want to train different kinds of students to go get PhDs, and then those students need to become the professors, you know. So I got there and I found that they have a lot of money there for diversity hiring and very few proposals being made. I'm like, let's use that money, you know. So there are, where there's money, you know, you can then sometimes go that route by using the money that they've set aside to say, we're doing something about this. Okay, let's really go for it. But on the other hand, you know, it's a much bigger problem, and that was what Katya was talking about. Education should not cost what it costs. I mean, I can't afford to send my kids to a place like Columbia, and we'll be lucky, or all of us will be lucky to be able to pay for our kids to go to college in the way that things are going. So what we really need to do is take down this notion that we should all be paying $50,000 a year for kids to go to college. That We can't do that. And that's what we're doing, is bankrupting the next generation who have to take out so many loans that they can't buy that vaunted house that, you know, everyone's been talking about, because they're going to be in debt till they're in their 50s, at which point who even knows what the real estate market would look like. So all of this stuff that's being like, don't worry kids, a better world is possible, it gets better, everything's going to be fine. Bullshit, right? Bullshit. So I think that we have to work across campuses. Use Columbia's money. Use the political awareness on a campus like this, whatever resource you have, to work against the tendency nowadays in university to go towards more tuition, more administration, less offerings, fewer students, and the weakening of the university as a force in public life. That's what it kind of adds up to.
Does anyone else want to jump in about the importance or future of interdisciplinary work on this campus? I know there's a lot of folks here.
I think coming back to Stuart's point, and actually, Dean Leaker, you made this point too, that we do have these things and we do have these trainings, but that sadly, the people that we think need these trainings are the ones who never show up. And so what we have is basically, which is wonderful, like-minded people should come together, and we should recognize each other. We should take a good look at who's in this room. We should consider each other our allies. We should know that what we have, because we're here together, that we have each other's back, and that we should be organizing with each other. And that we then also need to pay attention who doesn't come to these meetings. Because it is very important when you start to vote for someone, when you start to recognize who's taking positions of power, when you start to recognize who it is that wants to represent us, in our unions, on our boards, in our committees, that maybe those people should not be voted in. And that start talking openly. Let's stop being afraid of calling out the people that actually need to be addressed for their misogyny, for their homophobia, for their xenophobia. There is so much ugly talk coming from so many people that are actually educated. It's very sad in a higher education environment. And we kind of need to maybe stand up and support each other when we do stand up, to call out that things when it's happening. And when any of us do something, reward each other and somewhat pump that up. I think the open dialogues tour, particularly like for you, not that you might be like someone else who self-identifies themselves as a white heterosexual man who's, but you might identify that way, but that you would be the kind of man that would talk to someone like that, because if I did, I don't really get listened to. So using these positions of power that we have and these privileges that we do to actually direct them and make them uncomfortable, because it's about time that they sort of know that it's not okay for the things that they have going on. It's time to not allow people to get away with this stuff anymore, make them uncomfortable, because for so long we've been like, well, we can do something about it and we can try, and we've been silent. So maybe here's our chance. Stand up.
This campus loves to bring around this word called diversity. And it's always directed towards the students, like, you have to be tolerant to each other. But what is it when I'm a student and I still experience homophobia or transphobia from my professors? And even if I have those options of going to the Title IX office or speaking to the student advocate, which I was recently told about, what are those options when there's still those people aren't being trained? As you said, it's not the students who need to go into sensitivities training. It's those people that we need to call out, those people that need to go to these sensitivities training, that in our back of our head that we're thinking, maybe it's this person who really needs it and not me. And it's all about, keeping track of that, because if you do that, it only makes it more uncomfortable for them.
I just wanted to follow up on Professor Perea and think about some of the other binaries that we don't necessarily talk about, but I've heard a little bit about, and I worry that the binaries that we ourselves play into are actually going to fuel some of these attacks. So when I hear critiques of vocational programs, for example, I've heard it kind of, and I think about faculty who aren't here, our EMS faculty, our nursing faculty. Why is that? Is it because they're all not woke, or is it because we haven't reached out to them? I don't know what the answer is to that, but I think that for me, liberal arts is at its best when it's infused through everything. And I do think we want people to earn liberal arts degrees. I mean, that's my background. But I worry that sometimes in defending the liberal arts, we kind of go on an attack against other kinds of programs, or against what we might call in a too reductive way, careerism. I understand careerism from people who are maybe desperate or more desperate than I was. So I don't know quite how to repair that rift, but I think it's here. And it's something that I really do worry about. And I think pulling career programs together with liberal arts programs, to me, is the best way to preserve liberal arts, not to pit them against each other. So.
I was thinking about what Katya was saying earlier about, calling people out or issues. I've been told many times that what's important in a composition class as an English teacher is not content, and what's important is just teaching the skills, right? Content second, skills first. So if you try to teach it a course, like a freshman composition, as a content course, and you try to infuse women's and gender studies, which I've done many times, it's often seen as like counterproductive, or something that's like, this is secondary to what you should be doing. And I have trouble trying to figure out how to balance that. I don't know if other folks in the English department could speak about that. Yeah.
I guess my answer, and perhaps I'm sometimes in some ways defiant, is keep doing it anyway. Yeah. It doesn't make sense to me to even teach writing in that way. And most places that are fancy, let's say, don't even teach writing that way anymore. They are teaching it through, they're calling it like writing and thinking and things like that. So it's also interesting that we would be stuck in that, because that's not even the trend anymore, right? It's content-based. And it has been for so long that I remember that even when I was in college, that it was content-based. So I think it's partly about, I guess, also changing the environment of our department so that there's a voice for that too, that it can sit next to each other, right? Not that we need to get rid of other strategies, but also that there's room for starting with the content and then building on it. Because how do we write about something anyway if we're not thinking about something that doesn't even really make much sense and is boring? I mean, I think that's also part of it. It's not very interesting to just learn mechanics of writing. We don't remember it, right? 3 years later, we might not remember that. So I would say just keep doing it. I know that's not an adequate answer, though.
I mean, I have a question, and Dr. Halberstam, you can pick it up, or maybe one of the faculty members haven't spoken yet, because your voice is important. But what do we do in terms of this program, in terms of interdisciplinary work, and what does solidarity look like across disciplines, across campuses, across the world? Does anyone want to pick up on that? How do we offer support for each other? How do we show up?
So I went to an American Chemical Society conference last year. And so it's a very technical conference with a bunch of chemists. But they actually had a session for LGBTQ chemists. And it's not necessarily to talk about LGBTQ issues, but to talk about their research. And it was really interesting because it was very multidisciplinary. You have chemists talking about organic chemistry, physical chemistry, theoretical chemistry. They don't necessarily overlap, but the sessions were very well attended. People were there to support each other. And so in terms of our campus, I think one way that we can cross-pollinate among disciplines is basically to find ways that we can do that. So for example, in the honors program, for example, we have our distinctions journal, and it's really cool because and for one article you read a STEM article, and then the next article is about a different article about ethnicity, and then another one about LGBTQ, and all of these are basically contributions from the college campus, from students. Our students are naturally drawn towards these diverse issues. So if we can find different avenues, different spaces for our students to explore these and support our students, not just if we, for example, manage to support our students in chemistry, and at the same time somebody else in the same forum manage to support our students that are studying women's studies, then that way we can essentially mix it and make people more aware and even reach out to faculty who are not really interested in those fields per se.
Hi, my name is AJ Rielvik, and I'm not a student here, I'm a researcher. And I am just thinking about sort of the question of like, what do you do when you want to be in another institution, like Columbia or something? And I went to a really small like college, and it was in a really rural area, and everyone there was always like, I want to get out here and do something else. And I think it's really important that like you have this amazing faculty here, and I think it's important that you are here for your students and that you value like being where you are, because I ended up like at this really prestigious institution, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I got there, and it was mostly like wealthy white cis people, and in every situation ever I was always the only trans deaf person, and it was kind of like I came all this way to then teach all these other people things, and like wish that I was back in my old institution where the faculty were really unparalleled, but also really underappreciated and really underpaid, and we're always wishing for like a different opportunity. And I think that when it comes to creating like solidarity across lines and stuff, it's so important that you stay in your communities and that you value your communities, because your communities value you. And just that like your students like want to hear from you as well. And I think the question of like, how do you make sociology relevant to mathematics is like, a sociologist can't really tell you that because we don't know about mathematics, but sexism and racism are prevalent everywhere in every classroom, and can always be sort of brought back into another discipline. So there can always be like, you know, I wish I'd had a math teacher who had talked to me about how numbers are not a European invention, and yet all of my math teachers have been white men. Like, I wish that, you know, I've had, like, we could talk about why, like, I have this whole biology class and there's this whole question of, is there a gay gene? But we never talk about stuff like that in the biology class. So all these things can always be interdisciplinary, and it's kind of like, I think professors can always say, like, what is my specialization? And then what's the larger conversation that's going on here? And also like centering like marginalized students and saying like, if my entire class right now was Black trans women, how would they need me to approach this subject? Because that's what everyone really needs to hear as well. So yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Running out of time. Before we run out of time, I just want to say like two things. Like one, like, you know, what can we do? I mean, I think that a lot of this has to do with, you know, this sort of like, you know, manufactured scarcity. You know, this austerity regime we've been under for how many decades? And so a lot of this is putting pressure on, you know, politicians and the state to make the resources available that are needed to support these important classes. And then secondly, I want to say, just to piggyback on Jack's point, like that, I mean, about gender and sexuality studies being more relevant than ever. I mean, as a male who teaches the sociology of gender, and I'm just amazed at the context I find myself in and the relevance of, say, masculinity studies for our primarily working class, student of color, immigrant-based, you know, constituency, and to the pressures that males are put under to provide historically all these stereotypes and all these pressures, and then clashing with the reality of like the failure of the American dream and the difficulty to actually make money anymore and provide, and the pressures that are being put on boys and men. And I think that when you start, like, in a sense, women have benefited from a feminist movement that has been reflecting on gender for decades, and men are like in the dark ages and way behind, and there's all this pressures that put on men, and they don't understand how it's gendered. And so this is something that we can offer to students that desperately need and can benefit from a little bit more awareness of the kind of weird pressures that's being put on them. Do you know what I'm saying? And then to get rid of that, right when it's becoming more more and more applicable and relevant, and when new lines of thought are being initiated, is like really devastating. But I'm also just really happy to, and it's just like cool to be like, wow, I mean, to see how certain ideas can change students' way of looking at things and alleviate stress and open their mind, and that's the cool thing. But we need more money. We need money. We need money to do it. How do we get it?
I would recognize our positionality, right, as being different, but I would push against this idea that we need to placate to careerism at the same time that, you know, people in the career fields, I mean, Kettering, I mean, there's all sorts of organizations out there that want us to do the work, but they're not educating for liberal arts in the workplace. And so I think the second thing is to remember that they put the binary on us. So it's not our job to convince them, right, that we need to do a better job of something to help them. And I think that's the difficulty, is that I think we have to decide as an institution, what is it we think higher education is for? And if we don't know that answer, then I'm not sure we can do any of these, I think, really lovely ideas. But I don't think, if we don't have a base to work from, then I don't think that we'll make much progress.
Can I respond to that? Because I'm wondering who the they is when you say they put it on us. It may be this external system, right? But there are people within that nodes of power, within the career education, who may or may not be woke, who may or may not. But I don't know that an assistant professor or a CLT in EMS is actually putting that on. So those are the people I'm talking about reaching out to. Those are the people I'm talking about. Do you know what I'm saying? So like I think, and I'm not saying placate, I'm saying like let's try to have a conversation where we can take seriously somebody's concern about a career and not placate it, but sort of embed it in this kind of contextual power system that Jack was talking about, Press Ellington was talking about. But I think to dismiss it is where the problem comes, and where there are faculty, and I mean, I'm saying it because I'm dean of faculty, who are really in difficult situations, in part because of some of our structures that nobody is aware of because we're not talking to them.
Right, and I think that is the positionality. And so I think, but I don't think it's as difficult to say I don't know where the positionality is. It's very clear. It's from the legislature, it's from corporate leaders, right? I mean, these are people we can list the names of, right?
But so the day, you want to be thinking about, when we're thinking about the day, reaching out to the career programs may not be the day, that they may be the way to counteract the day.
Maybe, but maybe not. And I think right, on the other hand, what I would say is, like, I mean, like Red and I have both gone to community college, and I know for a fact that I did not know what a career was at 18, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, and liberal arts is what gave me the opportunity to explore and then to become, you know, something that I could, you know, be happy about. So I think the concept of like a career is already kind of problematic within a liberal arts framework.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Yeah, this concept of binary, you know, there's another binary out there, and that is this binary of where do we learn? And there's the in the classroom learning, and there's the out of the classroom learning. And I mean, evident from us sitting around here today in this room, we're learning a lot right here out of the classroom. I don't know how many of these students are here because this is their class and they're here. But I know from my experience, like the out of the classroom experiences bring as much. I have asked, and I've put on paper that I think part of the mission of this college, the mission statement of this college, should be that we have learning in and outside this classroom. When we go to our farm here on Kingsborough, this is where we learn. When we come to this symposium or any symposium, and it doesn't take a lot of money to have out-of-classroom experiences where we as faculty, and I know that's how I met Katya, can connect to one another. Students can connect to one another. We, years ago in Women and Gender Studies, had the Clothesline Project where we put clotheslines up and we had T-shirts that students wrote, statements of violence. I mean, that was a great out-of-classroom learning experience. So I advocate for more of that as a way to network, to grow together, and maybe to build the program.
To go back to hers, Women and Gender Studies is extremely important, not only because it helps us better approach education, but relationship in general. It saves, to me, in my term, it saves relationship. Whether it's with your children, whether it's with the next person, a friend, because you have a better understanding of what to expect of that person, how they came to be. And an idea for me when I was in Dr. Parker's sociology class last semester was a better way to understand masculinity and femininity would be to also take the time to make a project where one woman and one man would actually know their background, to identify, how they lived, how their parents taught them to live a life that society said was, this is how a man should be, and why, and what does that make them feel better? Does that subjectify what they really believe, or does it help them? Not only that, but it creates a blockage, because for me as a mother of two, boy, girl, thank God, I teach both of them to enjoy each other's gender in a way where you can, my daughter would put like little bows on my son's head, and for the father of the children would say, no, you shouldn't do that. Why not? It's an experience for them to understand. It does not take away who they are. It just shows them how two worlds can actually collide somewhere in between to progress in a way that masculinity is no better than femininity. Femininity is no better than masculinity. But in a way, we can both ride along the future together. And in the Women and Gender Studies, if you guys can also do a favor, we've been writing why women and gender is important. We've been putting notes because it represents, for me, a part of my soul of how important women and gender is. Being bisexual was difficult for me. Living in a home full of Christians, it was very difficult. It was impossible. And when I took Red's course last semester and Women in American History with Professor Valle, I had the same response. Where the fuck did this come from? Why didn't I know this when I was a kid? This is not possible because my parents taught me that a woman should always listen to a man. That was my role. That was the role of a woman, to always follow the man's rule. And here, taking this course, it not only opened me up, but I also now respect every gender. I consider them to be an equal being. And it should not be that because if you teach a course that has nothing to do with women and genders, that you should not also see that other person, regardless if they're transgender or cross-dressing in any form or way, or they change their appearance. You should not try and shut them down because of that, but you should be more appealing to the idea that they're actually happy and they're coming to class to further educate themselves with the identity they found themselves to be.